Joining me now is Michael Fraser from the Institute of Directors and Una Diver from Ernst & Young to discuss the 2022 Directors' Fees report. So Michael, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the gender pay gap. It's shown that there's been quite a bit of movement in that area.
Yeah, there certainly has, Fiona, that we've got male and female non-executive directors virtually equal statistically, almost nothing between it, which is the majority of people who responded to the survey. But that's not even right across the board. So when you look at some of the more senior positions like chair and deputy chair, that hasn't followed or is not at the same stage as that.
Una, what's your take on it? Why do you think that gender pay gap has closed?
I think it's probably a reflection of the fact that more women are being appointed to larger boards. So the thing about director fees is that you base fees the same regardless if you're male or female on a board. So there's no gender pay gap as such on each board. So in order for the gap to narrow, what we need to see is more women being appointed to boards that are more complex. And that's what we're beginning to see, which is fantastic. Now, the state sector has led the charge on that, and which is fabulous. But of course, we need it across all sectors in order to make a real difference.
And the numbers still for private sector or listed directorships for women is still down, isn't it, on male?
It is still low, and there are some very high-profile female chairs, which is fantastic. But there's work still to be done. I think if you look at the rest of the data in the report, what you'll see as well is that it's not just male-female. Unfortunately, it is a community that is primarily made up of European directors as well. So New Zealand Europeans dominate the sample.
So we really need more diversity per se, not just gender.
Absolutely do. I know that the IOD share EY's view that we need to make sure that our governance community reflects the profile of the organisations they serve and also New Zealand as a whole.
Yeah, I think there's a second element to that too, Una, not only representative of the community, but it's crazy to just tap into half the talent pool or a subsection of the talent pool as well, particularly given our talent shortage.
In terms of the report, one of the things it showed obviously was a median fee increase of around 3%, which takes us back to sort of pre-pandemic levels. What's your take on that, Michael?
Yeah, I think we've gone from pre-pandemic to circa 3%. We hit the pandemic at 1%. We played catch up the following year at circa 10, 8%, 9, 10, high single digits anyway. And now we're back to 3%. So it tells a bit of a story of where we may be as an early indicator in terms of where we're sitting pre-pandemic and.
However, directors are saying they're not too happy with what they are getting.
Yeah, and that was quite marked this year compared to other years where we've seen general, I suppose, content around their fee levels. Realistically, what we know about governance is that it is getting more complex, and there are, Michael talked about the talent shortage earlier. That's something that every organisation is playing into. We've seen some data from the market that shows that for every vacancy at the moment, there's about 1.03 unemployed people. So it is so tight out there. We know that, and in most organisations, that's coming right up. That's coming to become a governance issue, and it's so difficult to drive productivity and improvement and change in your business if you don't have the people that you need. The other thing too is that sustainability is being, that's really clear, and we've seen a real rise in the number of sustainability committees and the number of times they meet, which is really interesting. And then you've got all the other things around changes in legislation, just general complexity, COVID-related supply chain challenges, all of which hit governance, hit the need to govern. And even things like organisations that are actually managing their way out of the pandemic. So anything in New Zealand that's in tourism and or any related tourism, travel, or any related industry, as a director said to me this morning, as a chair said to me this morning, we did that, and now we're doing this, and both of those are really hard.
Is it a case of the risk increasing for directors, or the workload, or both?
Look, in terms of workload, it's both. The number of hours spent in total board work has decreased, but then you look at there's been more preparation in advance. But when you look at some of those other indicators, like liability insurance, the perception of risk, you wouldn't increase your liability insurance if you didn't perceive more risk. And you also can see things like IOD courses. So right across the board, whether it be your standard health and safety, right through to the advanced directors course. So a full range of capabilities required there, which you wouldn't otherwise do if the demands weren't increasing.
Do you think that the pay they're getting is commensurate with the risk?
I find it really hard to say that it is when we look at, and I know that there's going to be people who will look at this clip and will be incensed by that. But if I look at things like the level of complexity in a governance role, which we know has increased over time, the expectations around show me, don't just tell me, that have really changed in both legislation and expectation around boards, which is really driving time and preparation, and also the number of meetings and the duration of meetings. And also generally what we expect directors to do and be across. I think it's really hard to say that these are not that these are well-paid roles, and I absolutely know that people will say these they'll point to one or two outliers, but the majority of these roles are not hugely paid. And we've also got to remember that there's an enormous director population sitting in the not-for-profit sector or other sectors where what they get is nothing, and they do the same thing and they have the same risk, and actually there's the same complexity in a lot of those organisations.
So there's quite a gap between what the non-executive directors get, say, on a listed company, for example, as opposed to those working in an SOE or statutory board.
Yeah. The Crown entities piece is really interesting because that was where a lot of the sentiment around adequacy of fees was clear, and actually it isn't. There is a big difference. There's a gap. I could bore you with the why, but I'm not going to do that. But there is a gap, and it probably does need to be addressed, because I think it would be exceptionally difficult to argue in any climate that it is easier to be in a governance role in a Crown entity than it is to be in a governance role in a listed entity. And in fact, if you look at some of them, they are constantly in the media, front of mind, and they deliver vital services to New Zealand.
Increases, in terms of the coming year, what's your expectations?
I actually think that they could be, it's always hard because it's a large sample, and actually at the median it probably won't move an enormous amount, says the person who deals with statistics every day. But what we do see is a lot of activity at the moment. So both the IOD and EY do consulting on director fees, and I can tell you there's a huge amount of activity at the moment. And actually there are some boards where they don't have regular review processes. In fact, there are a lot of boards where they don't have regular review processes. And so I'm expecting this year that the combination of probably a couple of years of either freezing fees or stopping paying during COVID, together with the fact that there's a lot of chat generally about remuneration, so the CPI is driving that, the LCI is driving that, the quarterly wage surveys are driving that, and actually just a feeling that probably as people are looking at it again, they need to get their house in order. I would suspect that there'll be some AGMs where people will go for decent increases this year.
What
And,
about
you know,
you,
but
Michael?
justified by good data.
Yeah, look, I'd add to that and say I've got 3 predictions if we're talking this time next year. First prediction is I think we'll see more sustainability committees as organisations gear up to take those obligations on and discharge them. I think we'll see liability insurance increase again. I think our active regulators will continue to be active regulators. And I think our gender pay gap piece, particularly at those senior levels, will start to close as we see that time lag for some of those senior and more complex governance roles being more evenly represented. So that's my 3 predictions.
All right, well, thanks
Brilliant.
very
And
much.
I'd add one to that, Michael, which is, I reckon, the rise of the REMCO. So, and the reason that I say that is pay transparency, like there's a huge push towards pay transparency at the moment. And as pay transparency becomes, it could even be legislated. If pay transparency gets legislated, then actually some of those REMCOs are going to have a lot to do. And it will add to the complexity of that particular committee.
All right, well, thanks very much for your time, Una Diver and Michael Fraser. Thank you.